The mirrors catch the light before anything else. Two walls of glass and steel, rising 170 meters above the desert floor, running in a perfectly straight line toward the horizon. No curve, no intersection, no road. What you are looking at is either the most radical city ever built, or the most expensive experiment in urban planning ever attempted in one country at one time. This is NEOM's The Line, and the deeper you look, the stranger it gets. Saudi Arabia sits on something uncomfortable. The kingdom has sold oil for nearly a century, and that oil has funded almost everything: schools, hospitals, military, government salaries, but the wells will not produce forever. The leadership in Riyadh has known this for years, and the pressure to find a different economic foundation has quietly shaped every major decision made in the last decade. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman put a name to that pressure in 2016. He called it Vision 2030. It was a plan to diversify the economy before the oil window closed, through tourism, technology, and entirely new industries that Saudi Arabia does not yet have. The line was the physical expression of that plan, not a city built around existing industry, a city built to attract industry that does not exist yet. The announcement came in 2021. The line would stretch 170 kilometers through the Tabuk region in northwestern Saudi Arabia, running from the Red Sea coast into the Hejaz Mountains. It would house 9 million people. There would be no cars, no roads, no carbon emissions from transportation. Every service, shops, schools, clinics, parks, within a 5-minute walk from any resident's front door. 9 million people. One building. The structure would be 170 meters tall and 200 meters wide. A single linear megastructure, mirrored on both exterior faces, reflecting the desert and sky. Inside, 3 stacked layers, transportation at the bottom, infrastructure in the middle, and human space at the top, running the entire length. For comparison, the structure would be roughly as tall as a 40-story office tower, but 170 kilometers long. That is longer than the entire London Underground network laid in a straight line. The engineering concept that makes the line function, or is supposed to make it function, is vertical stacking. Traditional cities grow outward. They require cars because the distances between things keep growing. The line proposes to eliminate those distances entirely by stacking everything vertically inside one continuous structure. At the base, a high-speed rail line would carry passengers from one end to the other in 20 minutes. That is roughly 850 kilometers per hour. For context, a standard high-speed train travels at around 300 kilometers per hour. The speed required for the line would demand technology currently beyond commercial deployment. Above the rail layer, an automated infrastructure layer handles utilities, deliveries, and maintenance systems. Then the human layer, neighborhoods, parks, streets, all enclosed within the 200-meter width of the structure. Each neighborhood would be essentially self-contained, but connected to every other neighborhood through the rail below. The math, on paper, is coherent, but paper and desert are very different things. The site chosen for the line was not empty. The Tabuk region is ancestral land of the Huwaitat tribe, an indigenous community with deep roots in northwestern Arabia. When NEOM's land acquisition process reached their villages, not everyone agreed to leave. In April of 2020, a tribal member named Abdul Rahim al-Hawaiti published videos online from his home in the village of Gayal. He spoke directly to camera. He refused to move. He said his community had not been meaningfully consulted and that the compensation offered was inadequate. He was killed by Saudi security forces days later. Several other members of his community were arrested. The Saudi government said security forces had acted in response to an armed attack. Human rights organizations documented the case extensively and disputed that account. Al-Hawaiti's family members who had survived were later sentenced to prison terms, including death sentences for some that were later commuted following international pressure. No major construction project of this scale proceeds without displacing someone, but the manner of displacement here drew documented criticism from Amnesty International and other organizations. These are facts. They are part of the record of how the line's land was cleared. Construction began in earnest around 2022. The first work concentrated near the Red Sea coast, where the foundation excavation required cutting deep into the rock. The scale of the earthworks visible from satellite imagery in 2023 was substantial. Enormous trenches carved through the coastal terrain, suggesting the foundational infrastructure was genuinely underway. But here is where the numbers become uncertain. The original projected cost of the line was reported at around $500 billion. Some later estimates placed total NEOM development, which includes other components beyond the line, closer to $1 trillion or beyond. Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund, the sovereign wealth fund backing the project, has committed enormous capital, but the kingdom's total annual oil revenues have historically run at around $200 to $250 billion per year. The math there requires explanation, and for years that explanation did not come clearly. Then in 2023 and 2024, reports began circulating that the scope of the line had been substantially revised. Bloomberg and other outlets reported that internal planning had shifted the initial phase target from 9 million residents to roughly 300,000 by 2030, a reduction of roughly 96% from the headline figure. 300,000 people in a 170-kilometer structure is a very different city from 9 million. The structural density that makes the 5-minute neighborhood concept work depends on having enough people to fill it. A building that long occupied at that density would be largely empty corridor. NEOM's representatives have disputed parts of those reports, but the revision, if accurate, points to something real. The original vision assumed population levels that would require massive voluntary migration, primarily of foreign workers and their families, into a structure with no proven equivalent anywhere on Earth. People do not move to cities because cities exist. They move because of jobs, schools, family, and familiarity. None of those things exist in a desert megastructure that has not yet been built. There is still something genuinely new happening at the construction site. The foundation work is real. The engineering studies are real. The contracts with international architecture and engineering firms, including AECOM and others, are documented. The ambition has produced actual groundbreaking, not just renderings, but the distance between what has been started and what has been announced is significant. The 20-minute rail connecting end to end would require sustained speeds that no current commercial train technology achieves. The fully enclosed exterior, mirrored glass at a scale of 170 kilometers by 170 meters, would require manufacturing, installation and maintenance systems that do not yet exist in that form. The energy demand for 9 million people in an enclosed, climate-controlled megastructure would be extraordinary, even with the planned solar and wind infrastructure in the surrounding region. Each of these problems is solvable in theory. Engineers can point to pathways. None of them are solved yet. What the line actually represents may be different from what it announces. Saudi Arabia is engaged in a deliberate effort to project technological credibility and attract foreign investment and talent. The announcement of the line achieved something immediate that construction cannot. It generated global coverage, positioned Saudi Arabia as a place of radical innovation, and created a context for pitching the kingdom to tech companies, financial institutions and international governments. Whether the line ever reaches 9 million residents, or 300,000, or settles into a very expensive, smaller urban node near the coast, the announcement itself served a function. That function was not engineering, it was positioning. That is not cynicism. Nations have always used infrastructure as signal. The United States built the interstate highway system partly as military logistics and partly as a statement of post-war confidence. The UAE built the Burj Khalifa partly as an engineering achievement and partly as a calling card for Dubai as a global city. The signal and the structure can both be real at once. The workers currently on site at NEOM are building something. The excavations are deep. The foundations require genuine engineering. The early infrastructure will create real capacity for some kind of city, even if smaller than announced. What that city eventually looks like, whether it ever approaches the mirror-walled vision in the promotional material, depends on decisions that have not yet been made, investments that have not yet been committed, and a global migration of skilled workers and residents that cannot be mandated. The desert does not care about timelines. It absorbs ambition without comment, and it has absorbed many. Whether this becomes a new model for how cities can function, dense, carless, vertically stacked, or a partially completed monument to a moment when oil wealth tried to purchase the future, that answer is still years away. The story of the line is still being written in excavated rock and boardroom revisions and satellite images that update every few weeks, in a stretch of desert that was very recently someone's home.